Hello there, thank you for clicking on this video. Your time is valuable, so we are super grateful that you are giving our little channel a chance. Any feedback is appreciated. Enjoy the story.
The War of the Worlds by hgwells. Chapter 11. At the Window. I have already said that my storm of emotions have a trick of exhausting themselves. After a time I discovered that I was cold and wet and with little pools of water about me on the stair carpet. I got up almost mechanically, went into the dining room and drank some whiskey, and then I was moved to change my clothes. After I had done that, I went upstairs to my study, but why did I so, I don't know. The window at my study looks over the trees and the railway towards Corswell Common. In the hurry of our departure, this window had been left open. The passage was dark, and, by contrast with the picture by the window frame and close, the side of the room seemed impenetrably dark. I stopped short in the doorway. The thunderstorm had passed. The towers of the Oriental College and the pine trees about it had gone, and very far away, lit by a vivid red glare, the common about the sand pits was visible. Across the light, huge black shapes, grotesque and strange, moved busily to and from. It seemed indeed as if the whole country in that direction was on fire. A broad hillside set with minute tongues of flames, swaying and writhing with the gust of the dying storm, and throwing a red reflection upon the clouds cup above. Even now and then a haze of smoke from some near conflagration drove across the window and hit the Martian shapes. I could not see what they were doing, nor the clear form of them, nor recognize the black objects they were buzzing upon. Neither could I see the near fire through the reflections of the dance on the wall and ceilings of the study. A sharp resonance tug of burning was in the air. I closed the door noiselessly and crept towards the window. As I did so, the view opened out until, on the one hand, it reached to the houses about the walking station, and on the other, the charred and blackened pine wood of Byfleet. There was a light down below the hill on the railway, near the arch, and several of the houses along the Maybury Road and the streets near the station were glowing ruins. The light upon the railway puzzled me at first. There was black heat and a vivid glare, and to the right of that row of yellow obligons, then I perceived that was the racket train, the four parts smashed and on fire, the hinder carriages still upon the rail. Between these three main centers of light, the houses, the train, and the burning county towards Chopham, stretched irregularly patch of dark country, broken here and there by intervals of dumbly glowing and smoking ground. It was a strange spectacle, that black expanse set with fire. It reminded me more than anything else to the potteries at night. At first I could distinguish no people at all, though I peered intently for them. Later I saw against the light of walking station a number of black figures hurrying one after another across the line. And this was the little world in which I had been living securely for years, this fiery chaos. What had happened in the last 7 hours, I still did not know, nor did I know, though I was beginning to guess, the relation between this mechanical colossi and the sluggish lump I had been disgorged from the cylinder. With a query feeling of impersonal interest, I turned my desk chair to the window, sat down and stared at the blackened country, and particularly at the three giant black things that were going to and from in the glare about the sandpit. They seemed amazingly busy. I began to ask myself what they could be. Were they intelligent mechanisms? Such a thing I felt was impossible. Or did a Martian sit within each, ruling, directing, using much as a man's brain sit and rule in his body? I began to compare the things to human machines, to ask myself for the first time in my life how an iron clot or steam engine would seem to an intelligent lower animal. The storm had left the sky clear, and over the smoke of the burning land, the little fending pinpoints of Mars was dropping into west when a soldier came into my garden. I heard a slight scraping at the fence and roused myself from the lethargy that had fallen upon me. I looked down and saw him dimly, clambering over the palings. At the sight of another human being, my torpor passed, and I leaned out of the window eagerly. "Hist!" I said in a whisper. He stopped astride of the fence in doubt. Then he came over and across the lawn to the corner of the house. He bent down and stepped softly. "Who is there?" he said, also whispering, standing under the window and peering up. "Where are you going?" I asked. "Gods, no! Are you trying to hide?" "That is it. Come into the house," I said. I went down, unfastened the door, and let him in, and locked the door again. I could not see his face. He was hatless, and his coat was unbuttoned. "My God," he said as I drew him in. "What has happened?" I asked. "What hasn't?" In the obscurity I could see he made a gesture of despair. "They wiped us out. Simply wiped us out," he repeated again and again. He followed me almost mechanically into the dining room. "Take some whiskey," I said, pouring out of a stiff dose. He drank it, and abruptly he sat down before the table, put his head on his arms, and began to sob and weep like a little boy, in a perfect passion of emotions, while I, with the curious forgetfulness of my own racing despair, stood beside him, wondering. It was a long time before I could steady his nerves to answer my questions, and then he answered perplexedly and brokenly. He was a driver in the artillery and had only come into action about 7. At that time firing was going across the common, and it was said the first party of Martians were crawling slowly towards their second cylinder under the cover of a metal shield. Later this shield struggled on a tripod leg and became the first of the fighting machines I had seen. The gun he drove had been unlimbered near Horsewell in order to command the sandpit, and its arrival it was that had precipitated the action. As the limber gunner went to the rear, his horse trod in a rabbit hole and he came down, throwing him into a depression of the ground. At the same moment, the gun exploded behind him, the ammunition blew up, there was fire all about him, and he found himself lying under a heap of charred dead men and dead horses. I lay still, he said, scared out of my wits, with the forequart of a horse on the top of me. We had been wiped out, and the smell, good God, like burning meat. I was hurt across the back by the fall of the horse, and there I had to lay until I felt better. Just like parade, it had been a minute before, then tumble, bang, swish. Wiped out, he said. He had hid under the dead horse for a long time, peeping out furtively across the common. The cardigan men had tried to rush in skirmishing order at the pit, simply to be swept out of existence. Then the mouse had risen to its feet and had begun to walk leisurely to and from across the common among the few fugitives, with its hat-like hood about exactly like a head of a cowled human being. A kind of arm carried a complicated metal case, about which green flashes scintillated, and out of the funnel of this there smoked the heat ray. In few minutes there was, so far as the soldier could see, not a living thing left upon the common, and very bush and tree upon it that was not already a blackened skeleton was burning. The hussar had been on the road beyond the curvature of the ground. He saw nothing of them. He heard the Maxims rattle for time and then become still. The giant saved walking station and its cluster of houses until the last. Then, in a moment, the heat ray was brought to bear, and the town became a heap of fiery ruins. Then the thing shut off the heat ray, and turning its back upon the artillerymen, began to widen away towards the smouldering pine wood that sheltered the second cylinder. As it did so, a second glittering titan built itself out of the pit. The second monster followed the first, and at that the artilleryman began to crawl very cautiously across the hot heather ash towards the horseway. He managed to get alive into the ditch by the end of the road and so escaped to walking. There his story began ejaculatory. The place was impassable. It seemed there was a few people alive there, frantic for the most part, and many burned and scalded. He was turned aside by the fire and hid among some almost scorching heaps of broken walls as one of the Martian giants returned. He saw this one pursue a man, catch him in one of its steel tentacles, and knock his head against the trunk of a pine tree. At last, after nightfall, the artilleryman rushed for it and got over the railway embankment. Since then he had been skulking along towards Maybury in the hope of getting out of danger, Londonwards. People were hiding in trenches and cellars, and many of the survivors had made off towards Woking village and Sand. He had been consumed with thirst until he found one of the water mains near the railway arch smashed, and the water bubbling out like a spring upon the road. That was the story I got from him. Bit by bit, he grew calmer, telling me, and trying to make me see the things he had seen. He had eaten no food since midday, he told me early in his narrative, and I found some mutton and bread in the pantry and brought into the room. We lit no lamp of fear of attracting the Martians, and ever and again our hands would touch upon bread or meat. As he talked, things about us came darkly out of the darkness, and the trampled bushes and broken rose trees outside the window grew distant. It would seem that a number of men or animals had rushed across the lawn. I began to see his face blackened and haggard, as no doubt mine was also. When we had finished eating, we went softly upstairs to my study, and I looked again out of the open window. In one night the valley had become a valley of ashes. The fire had dwindled now. Where flames had been, there were now steamers of smoke, but the countless ruins of shattered and gutted houses and blast and blackened streets that the night had hidden stood out now, gaunt and terrible, in the pitiless light of dawn. Yet here and there some object had had the luck to escape. A white railway signal here, the end of a greenhouse there, white and fresh amid the wreckage. Never before in the history of warfare had destruction been so indiscriminated and so universal. And shining with the growing light of the east, 3 of the metal giants stood about the pit, their cowls rotating as though they were surveying the desolation they had made. It seemed to me that the pit had been enlarged, and ever and again puffs of vivid green vapor steamed up and out of it towards the brightening dawn, steamed up, whirled, broke, and vanished. Beyond were the pillars of the fire about Chalkham. They became pillars of bloodshot smoke at the first touch of day. Chapter 12. What I saw of the destruction of Weybridge and Shepperton. As the dawn grew brighter, we withdrew from the window from which we had watched the Martians and went very quietly downstairs. The artilleryman agreed with me that the house was no place to stay in. He proposed, he said, to make his way Londonwards, and hence rejoin his battery, number 12 of the horse artillery. My plan was to return at once to Leatherhead, and so greatly had the strength of the Martian impressed me that I had determined to take my wife to New Haven and go with her out of the country forthwith. For I already perceived clearly that the country about London must inevitably be the scene of disastrous struggle before such creatures as these could be destroyed. Between us and Leatherhead, however, lay the 3rd cylinder with its guarding giant. Had I been alone, I think I should have taken my chance and struck across country, but the artilleryman dissuaded me. "It is no kindness to the right sort of wife," he said, "to make her a widow." And in the end I agreed to go with him, under cover of the woods, north towards Farrah Street, Cobham, before I parted with him. Thence I would make a big detour by Epsom to reach Leatherhead. We should have started at once, but my companion had been in active service and he knew better than that. He made me resunk the house for a flask, which he filled with whiskey, and we lined every available pocket with packets of biscuits and slices of meat. Then we crept out of the house and ran as quickly as we could down the ill-made road by which I had come overnight. The houses seemed deserted. In the road lay a group of 3 charred bodies close together, struck dead by the heat ray. and here and there were things that people had dropped: a clock, a slipper, a silver spoon, and the like poor valuables. At the corner turning up toward the post office, a little cart filled with boxes and furnitures, a horseless heeled over a broken wheel. A cash box had been hastily smashed upon and thrown under the debris. Except to lodge at the orphanage, which was still on fire, none of the houses had suffered very great here. The heat ray had shaved the chimney's tops and passed, yet, save ourselves, there did not seem to be a living soul on Melbury Hill. The majority of the inhabitants had escaped, I suppose, by way of the odd-looking road, a road I had taken when I drove to Leatherhead, or they had hidden. We went down the lane by the body of the man in black, sodden now from the overnight hell, and broke into the woods at the foot of the hill. We pushed through these towards the railway without meeting a soul. The woods across the line were but the scarred and blackened ruins of woods. For the most part, the trees had fallen, but a certain proportion still stood, these male grey stems, with dark brown foliage instead of green. On our side, the fire had done no more than scorch the nearer trees. It had fallen to secure its footing. In one place the woodmen had been at work on Saturday. Trees, felled and flash stream lay in a clearing, with heaps of sawdust by the sewing machine and its engine. Hard by was a temporary hut, deserted. There was no breath of wind this morning, and everything was strangely still, and even the birds were hushed. And as we hurried along, I and the artilleryman talked in whispers and looked now and again over our shoulders. Once or twice we stopped to listen. After a time we drew near the road, and as we did so we heard the clatters of hoofs and saw throughout the trees' stems 3 cavalry soldiers riding slowly towards Woking. We hailed them, and they halted while we hurried towards them. It was a lieutenant and a couple of privates of the 8th Hussars, with a stamp like theodolites, which the artilleryman told me was the heliograph. "You are the first man I have seen coming this way this morning," said the lieutenant. "What's brewing?" His voice and face were eager. The man behind me stared curiously. The artilleryman jumped down the bank into the road and saluted. "Gun destroyed last night, sir. Have been hiding, trying to rejoin batteries here. You will come in sight of Martian, I expect, about half a mile along this road." "What dickens are they like?" asked the lieutenant. "Giant in armor, sir. 100 feet high, 3 leg and body like aluminium, with mightily great head in a hood, sir." "Get out," said the lieutenant. "What confounded nonsense." "You will see, sir. They carry a kind of box here that shoots fire and strike you dead." "What do you mean? A gun?" "No, sir." And the artilleryman began a vivid account of the heat ray. Halfway through, the lieutenant interrupted him and looked at me. I was still standing on the bank by the side of the road. "It is perfectly true," I said. "Well," said the lieutenant, "I suppose it is my business to see it too. Look here," to the artilleryman. "We are detailed here, clearing people out of their houses. You'd better go along and report yourself to the Brigadier General Marvin and tell him all you know. He's at Weybridge." "Know the way?" "I do," I said, and he hurried his horse southwards again. "Half a mile, you say?" he said. "At most," I answered, and pointed over the treetops southwards. He thanked me and rode on, and we saw them no more. Further along, we came upon a group of 3 women and 2 children on the road, busy clearing out Labourer Cottage. They had got hold of a little hung trunk and were piling it up with unclean-looking bundles and shabby furniture. They were all too assiduously engaged to talk to us as we passed. By Byfleet Station, we emerged from the pine trees and found the country calm and peaceful under the morning sunlight. We were far beyond the rage of the heat rays there, and had it not been for the silent desertion of some of the houses, the stirring movement of packing in others, and the knot of soldiers standing on the bridge over the railway and staring down the line towards walking, the day would have seemed very like another Sunday. Several farm wagons and carts were moving quickly along the road to Audiostory, and suddenly through the gate of a field we saw a cross stretch of flat meadow, 6 12-pounders standing neatly at equal distance pointing towards walking. The gunners stood by the guns, waiting, and the ammunition wagons were at business-like distance. The men stood almost as if under inspection. "That's good," I said. "They will get one fair shot, at any rate." The artilleryman hesitated at the gate. "I shall go on," he said. Further on towards Weybridge, just before the bridge, there were a number of men in white fatigue jackets throwing up on a long ramp and more guns behind. "It is a bow and arrows against the lightning, anyhow," said the artilleryman. "They haven't seen the fire beam yet." The officers who were not actively engaged stood and stared over the treetops southwest towards, and the men digging would stop every now and again to stare in the same direction. By Flea was a tumult, people packing, and a score of hussars, some of them dismounted, some on horseback, were hunting them out. 3 or 4 black government wagons with crosses and white circles, and an old omnibus, among other vehicles, were being loaded in the village street. There were scores of people, most of them sufficiently sabbatical to have assumed their best clothes. The soldiers were having the greatest difficulty in making them realize the gravity of their position. We saw one shriveled old fellow with a huge box and a score or more of flower pots containing orchids, angrily expostulating with the corporal who would leave them behind. I stopped and gripped his arm. "Do you know what is over there?" I said, pointing at the pine tree tops that hid the Martians. Said he, turning. "I was explaining this is valuable." "Dad!" I shouted. "Dad is coming! Dad!" And leaving him to digest that if he could, I hurried on after the artilleryman. At the corner I looked back. The soldier had left him, and he was still standing by his box with the pots of orchids on the lid of it and staring vaguely over the trees. No one in Weybridge could tell us where the headquarters were established. The whole place was in such a confusion as I had never seen in any town before. Cars, carriages everywhere. The most astonishing, miscellaneous of conveyance and horseflesh. The respectable inhabitants of the place, men in golf and boating costume, wives prattling dresses or packing, riverside loafers energetically helping, children excited and for the most part highly delighted at this astonishing variation of their Sunday experiences. In the midst of it all, the worthy vicar was very pluckily holding an early celebration, and his bells was jangling out above the excitement. I and the artilleryman, seated on the step of the drinking fountain, made a very passable meal upon what we had brought with us. Patrol of soldiers, here no longer hussering, but grenadiers in white, were warning people to move now or to take refuge in their cellars as soon as the firing began. We saw as we crossed the railway bridge that a growing crowd of people had assembled, and about the railway station and the swarming platform was piled with boxes and packages. The ordinary traffic had been stopped, I believe, in order to allow of the passage of troops and guns to Chertsey, and I had heard since that a savage struggle occurred for place in the special trains that were put on at a late hour. We remained at Weybridge until midday, and at that hour we found ourselves at the place near Shepperton Lock where the Wey and Thames join. Part of the time we spent helping 2 old women to pack little cart. The Wey had a treble mount, and at this point boats were to be hired, and there was a ferry across the river. On the Shepperton side was an inn with a lawn, and beyond that the tower of Shepperton Church. It has been replaced by a spire, rose above the trees. Here we found an excited and noisy crowd of fugitives, and yet the flight had not grown to a panic. But there was already far more people than all the boats going to and from could enable to cross. People came panting along under the heavy burdens. One husband and wife were even carrying a small outhouse door between them, with some of their household goods piled thereon. One man told us he meant to try to get away from the Shepperton station. There was a lot of shouting, and one man was even jesting. The idea people seemed to have here was that the Martians were simply formidable human beings who might attack and sack the town, to be certainly destroyed in the end. Every now and then people would glance nervously across the way at the meadow towards the Chertsey, but everything over there was still. Across the Thames, except just here the boats landed, everything was quiet, in vivid contrast with the Surrey side. The people who landed there from the boat went tramping off down the lane. The big ferry boat had just made the journey. 3 or 4 soldiers stood in the lawn of the inn, staring and jesting at the fugitives, without offering to help. The inn was closed, as it was now within prohibition hours. "What is that?" cried the boatman, and "Shut up, you fool," said the man near me to the yelping dog. Then the sound came again, this time from the direction of Chertsey. A muffled thud, the sound of a gun. The fighting was beginning. Almost immediately, unseen batteries across the river to our right, unseen because of the trees, took up the course, firing heavily one after another. A woman screamed. Everyone stood arrested by the sudden stir of a battle, near us and yet invisible to us. Nothing was to be seen save the flat meadows, cows feeding unconcernedly for the most part, the silvery powered windows motionless in the warm sun. "The soldiers will stop them," said the woman beside me, doubtingly. A haziness rose over the trees. Then suddenly we saw a rush of smoke far away up the river, a puff of smoke that jerked up into the air and hung, and forthwith the ground heaved under feet, and a heavy explosion shook the air, smashing 2 or 3 windows in the houses near, and leaving us astonished. "Here they are!" shouted the man in a blue jacket. "Wonders! Do you see them? Wonders!" Quickly, one after another, 1, 2, 3, 4 of the armored Martians appeared, far away over the little trees, across the flat meadows that stretched toward Chertsey, and striding hurriedly towards the river. Little cowled figures they seemed at first, going with rolling motion and as fast as flying birds. Then, advancing obliquely towards us with the fifth, their armored bodies glittered in the sun, as they swept swiftly forwards upon the guns, growing rapidly large as they drew nearer. One on the extreme left, the remotest that is, flourished a huge case high in the air, and the ghostly terrible heat ray I had already seen on Friday night smote toward Chertsey and struck the town. The crowd near the water's edge seemed to me to be for a moment horror-struck. There was no screaming or shouting, but silence, then a hoarse murmur and a movement of feet, a splashing from the water. A man, too frightened to drop portmanteau he carried on his shoulder, swung around and sent me staggering with a blow from the corner of his burden. A woman thrust at me with her hands and rushed past me. I turned with the rush of the people, but I was not too terrified, for though the terrible heat ray was in my mind, to get under water, that was it. "Get under water!" I shouted, unheeded. I faced about again and rushed towards the approaching Martian, rushed right down the gravelly beach and headlong with the water. Others did the same. A boatload of people putting back came leaping out as we rushed past. The stones under my feet were muddy and slippery, and the river was so slow, and I ran perhaps 20 feet, scarcely waist deep. Then, as the Martian towered overhead scarcely a couple of 100 yards away, I flung myself towards under the surface. The splash of people in the boats leaping into the river sounded like thunderclaps in my ears. People were landing hastily on both sides of the river, but the Martian machine took no more notice for the moment of the people running this way and that than a man would of the confusion of ants in a nest against which his foot was sticked. When half suffocated, I raised my head above water. The Martian hood pointed at the batteries that were still firing across the river. and as it advanced, it swung loose what must have been the generator of the heat wave. In another moment, it was on the bank, and in a stride widening halfway across, the knees of its foremost leg bent at the further bank, and in another moment, it had risen itself to its fullest height again, close to the village of Spartan. Forthwith, the sixth gun, which, unknown to anyone on the right bank, had been hidden behind the outskirts of that village, fired simultaneously. The sudden near concussion, the last close upon the first, made my heart jump. The monster was already raising the case generating the heat ray as the first shell burst 6 yards above the hood. I gave a cry of astonishment. I saw and thought nothing of the other 4 Martian monsters. My attention was riveted upon the nearer accident. Simultaneously, 2 other shells burst into the air near the body, as the hood twisted around at the time to receive, but not in time to dodge the 4th shell. The shell burst clean in the face of the thing. The hood bulged, flashed, was whirled off in a dozen tattered fragments of red flash and glittering metal. "Hit!" I shouted, with something between scream and cheer. I heard answering shouts from the people in the water about me. I could have leaped out of the water with the momentary exultation. The decapitated colossus reeled like a drunken giant, but it did not fall over. It recovered its balance by a miracle, and, no longer heeding its step, and with a camera that fired the heat ray now rigidly upheld, it revealed swift upon the Shepperton. The living intelligence, the Martian within the hood, was slain and slashed to the 4 winds of heaven, and the thing was now but a mere intricate device of metal whirling to destruction. It drove along in a straight line, incapable of guidance. It struck the tower of Shepperton Church, smashed it down, as the impact of a battering ram might have done, swerved aside, blundered on, and collapsed with tremendous force into the river out of my sight. A violent explosion shook the air, and a spout of water, steam, mud, and shattered metal shot far up into the sky. As the camera of the heat ray hit the water, the latter heat immediately flashed into steam. In another moment, a huge wave, like muddy tidal bore, but almost scaldingly hot, came sweeping around the band of steam. I saw people struggling shorewards and heard their screaming and shouting faintly above the seething and roaring of the Martian's collapse. For a moment, I heeded nothing of the heat, forgot the patient need of self-preservation. I splashed through the tumultuous water, pushing aside the man in black to do so, until I could see round the bend. Half a dozen deserted boats pitched aimlessly upon the confusion of the waves. The fallen Martian came into sight downstream, lying across the river, and for the most part submerged. Thick clouds of steam were pouring out of the wreckage, and throughout the tumultuously rattling whips I could see, immediately and vaguely, the gigantic limbs churning the water and clinging in a splash and spray of mud and froth in the air. The tentacles swayed and struck like living arms, and save for the helpless purposelessness of this movement, it was as if some wounded thing were struggling for its life amid the waves. Enormous quantities of ruddy brown fluid was spurting up in noisy jets out of the machine. My attention was diverted from this dead flurry by a furious yelling like that of a thing called a siren in our manufacturing towns. A man, knee-deep near the towing path, shouted inaudibly to me and pointed. Looking back, I saw the other Martians advancing with gigantic strides down the river from the direction of Charsey. The Shepperton gun spoke this time unavailingly. At that, I ducked at once underwater, and holding my breath until movement was an agony, blundered painfully ahead under the surface as long as I could. The water was in a tumult about me, and rapidly growing hotter. When for a moment I raised my head and take breath and throw the hair and water from my eyes, the steam was rising in whirling white fog that at first hid the Martians altogether. The noise was deafening. When I saw them dimly, colossal figures of grey, magnified by the mist. They had passed by me, and two were stopping over the throttling, tumultuously ring of their comrade. Their third and fourth stood beside him in the water, one perhaps 200 yards from me, the other towards Lechem. The generator of the heat rays waved high, and the hissing beam smoothed down this way and that. The air was full of sounds, a deafening and confusing conflict of noises, the clangorous din of the Martians, the crash of falling houses, the thud of trees, fences, sheds flashing into flame, the crackling and the roaring of the fire. Dense black smoke was leaping up to mingle with the steam from the river, and as the heat ray went to and from over Weybridge, its impact was marked by flashes of incandescent white that gave place at once to a smoke dance of lurid flames. The nearer houses still stood intact, awaiting their fate, shadowy, faint and pallid in the steam, with the fire behind them, going to and from. For a moment, perhaps, I stood there, breath high in almost boiling water, dumbfounded in my position, hopeless of escape. Through the reek I could see the people who had been with me in the river scrambling out of the water through the reeds, like little frogs hurrying through the grass from the advancing of a man, or running to and from in utter dismay on the towing path. Then suddenly the white flashes of the heat ray came leaping towards me. The houses caved in as they dissolved at its touch, and darted out flames. The trees changed to fire with a roar. The ray flickered up and down the towing paths, licking off the people who ran this way, and came down to the water's edge, not 50 yards from where I stood. It swept across the river to Shepperton, and the water in its track raised in boiling wheel crested with steam. I turned shorewards. In another moment, the huge wave, well nigh at the boiling point, had rushed upon me. I screamed aloud and scalded. How blinded, agonized, I struggled through the leaping, hissing water towards the shore. Had my foot stumbled, it would have been the end. I fell helpless in the full sight of the Martians, upon the broad, bare gravelly spit that runs down the mark the edge of the Wey and Thames. I expected nothing but that. I have a dim memory of the foot of the Martian coming down within a score of yards of my head, driving straight into the loose gravel, swirling in this way and that in lifting again, of a long suspense, and then of the four carrying the debris of their comrade between them, now clear and then presently faint through the veil of smoke, receding interminably, as it seemed to me, across a vast space of river and meadow. And then, very slowly, I realized that by a miracle I had escaped.
This is the end of today's story. I hope that these past minutes helped you relax and ease you into falling asleep. If you are not 100% there yet, let us just do a breathing exercise. Count mentally with me your breath intakes and exhales. Concentrate on the count, nothing more. Intake 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and release 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. In 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Out 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Intake 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and release 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. In 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Out 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Intake 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and release 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, in 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, out 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, intake 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and release 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, in 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, out 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, in 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, out 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3.